This week saw the announcement of what many people will consider to be most welcome news, that the federal government is close to finalising an agreement to provide mass vaccination against the virus that causes COVID-19 at no cost to individuals. Although the race is still on to identify a vaccine that is proven to be both safe and effective, there now seems to be some light at the end of the COVID tunnel. Put simply, mass access to a good vaccine will broaden the horizons not just for policymakers, but also for the community as a whole. With a vaccine in hand, we've got an opportunity to reimagine how we organise our society, from politics to the economy, not being driven by the lash of necessity, but as a positive choice to embrace something better. This is precisely what happened after the ravages of the Black Death, where 30 to 60% of the population was killed. When the plague finally receded, a whole new approach to agriculture, economics, religion, politics, to everything emerged with the dawning of the period we now know as the Renaissance. Well, what will our renewal be like? Are we brave enough to imagine a world as is inspired as the Renaissance? However, I'm getting ahead of myself because as things stand, there is no proven vaccine. And even if there was, there are still some important ethical issues that need to be addressed in its deployment. For example, will Australia secure a sufficient number of doses to support people in our wider region, such as the Pacific Islands? And what of the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison's musings that the government might penalise those who choose not to vaccinate? Well, to help answer the first issue, I wonder if we might reflect on the concept of Kanyini. As Chilpi Randall described Kanyini in Melanie Hogan's film of that name, it is the principle of connectedness through caring and responsibility that underpins Aboriginal life. Well, I've seen this principle at work firsthand. The Pintupi people from the Western Desert of Central Australia conceived of and funded entirely out of their own resources the world's most remote dialysis service, something that they were told was impossible to achieve. Having done all of the hard work, they then decided to offer another mob, the Warlpiri, the opportunity to go before them in making use of the service. That kind of selflessness from some of the most disadvantaged people in our community is breathtaking, and an example of the ethical roots that lie deep in the land we share. Perhaps we should look more to our First Nations people for ethical touchstones that uniquely belong to and inform life on this continent. Turning to the second issue, that of compulsory vaccinations, some people will strenuously and sincerely object to being pressured into accepting vaccination. They will offer a range of reasons for their opposition, ranging from religious objections to a fear of potential harm, physical, mental or spiritual. Now, unfortunately, such concerns will remain, if only for a few, despite the overwhelming published and peer-reviewed evidence for the general safety and efficacy of vaccines. However, even if there were to be rare exceptions where a vaccine causes a harmful side effect, and of course acknowledging the sincerity of those who oppose vaccinations, whether in general or in this case, we're still left to ask if the beliefs and rights of individuals should outweigh the interests of the community as a whole. The answer to this question is not immediately obvious. After all, this question has been at the heart of every debate about what an ethically justifiable response to the COVID-19 pandemic is, whether the topic be lockdowns, border closures, the wearing of masks, or now the expectation that everyone should be vaccinated. The trouble is that in some cases the rights of individuals would seem to have been given precedence over those of the community. For example, in prioritising the lives of the relatively few aged and infirm over the collective interest in a strong economy. While in other cases, such as with vaccination, we tend to favour the welfare of the community over the rights of individuals. But perhaps there is greater consistency than at first appears to be the case. Perhaps the preservation of the lives of even a minority of people is a collective good. Personal liberty and freedom of conscience matter, but not when the burden is overwhelmingly borne by others, and certainly not when the price to be paid is an early and preventable death from infection. That seems to be the constant in this debate. A recognition that in matters of life and death, our collective interests take priority over the right to choose, believe, or act as we might individually prefer. There is a fine line between respecting the rights of individuals and requiring collective action to preserve our society, without which individuals are ultimately diminished. While we might seek to impose on individuals as little as possible, are there times when the good of all must be given priority? So let me ask you, when it comes to ethical issues, how and where do you draw the line?